Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Nancy has always dreamed of becoming a doctor. She went to school and thought after graduation she would go to medical school to graduate and start her professional career. Well, daughter, have you changed your mind? Her mom asked her all the time. Of course not. This is my dream, and I will achieve and go to it, answered her. All right. Well, I'm counting on you. When you have a doctor in the family, it's wonderful. A woman came up to her and hugged her. They lived in a small town, and when Nancy was about to enter school, she learned about the construction of the Baikal-Amur main line. The girl herself did not know why she was so beckoned there, but she wanted it. No, my dear, you first enroll from study, and then we will already think about the construction of the century, the woman said. All right. Nancy could not disobey her mother. They were always together, always listening to each other. And now Nancy couldn't just leave the woman she loved more than anyone else in the world. She enrolled in college. The years of study began. Everything went well. One might even say perfectly. Nothing the girl wanted so much as to fulfill her dream and go to the place where she thought she was expected. First year, second year, third year practicum. She liked everything, but she wanted to help people. Class, are you going to the dance tonight? Her friend, with whom they shared a room, asked her. No, I'm not, she answered her. And indeed, Nancy didn't go anywhere. She stayed at home, studying everything. Studied encyclopedias. Really wanted to know more. She was one of the smartest on the course, too. The teacher was always praised and prophesied a brilliant future for the girl. And when the years of study were behind Nancy, as the best student on a Komsomol ticket was sent to the construction of the highway. How had she been looking forward to it? And now there was an opportunity to get a job, to get a good salary, and with it everything else. But for a long time, the girl did not have to disappear there in that cold land on the shore of Lake Baikal. But she didn't know it yet. Daughter, where will you go? Her mother hugged her goodbye. Mom, for the good life, she told her. What a good life. The woman didn't understand it. We'll see, the girl told her. She waved goodbye. Then she got on a bus and went to the station. There she bought a train ticket, and now she was on her way to her dream. Nancy had heard many different stories about this construction site. She realized that it would be hard, but she still aspired to go there. She arrived, indeed, got a job as a medic. They gave her a raise. So far, she couldn't say anything bad about it. Not a couple months later, she met Noah. He was a handsome young man who was always joking, thanking, singing songs on his guitar. He just saw the fiery girl and immediately approached her. Are you here alone? He asked her instead of greeting her that day. Yes. Who should I be with? The girl was surprised. But no husband, no children, no one. He wondered. No, she shook her head. We'll be friends. I'm Noah. He gave her his hand. And I'm Nancy. She said cheerfully. It's really nice to meet you. It seemed as if Noah had nothing more to say right now. Though before, when Nancy saw him in companies, he was always joking about everyone and saying different things. And that made me feel embarrassed for Nancy. What are you going to do this weekend? The young man asked her. I don't know yet. What do you have to offer? She asked. And let's get out into nature. Put up a tent, a leg, make a fire in a cauldron, something boiled, he suggested to her. How romantic does that sound? Of course I agree, Nancy answered him. And over the weekend they had it just as Noah told the girls. Couldn't help but like it. Then they'd walk hand in hand. He'd walk her home and to wherever she needed to go. And already the young people themselves did not notice how it happened, but they began to live together. Nancy thought she was such a hostess. She tried to cook something tasty for her boyfriend, but they didn't live together for 8 months. Like Noah said, he had to leave. How long will you be gone? Nancy asked him then. You know, I don't know myself, but I think I'll be back soon. He smiled at me and touched the tip of his nose. I'll be waiting for you. she said to him and gave him a hug. "Good, and I will definitely come back," mouthed Noah, kissed her, and got into the car, which was now heading to the station. The second month passed, and when the third Noah had started, there was still no Noah. But Nancy realized that she was expecting a baby. This news both pleased her and saddened her. The girl realized that she could have the baby here, but if she did it at home, where her mother would be around, it would be several times easier for her than alone. Noah never arrived. Nancy inquired where he lived from his friends, but they didn't know anything. So she packed her bags and headed back. It was bitter to realize that as soon as her dream came true, she had trusted, one might say, the first man she met. And he did this to her. "Mai, you're home." She entered the apartment and immediately called out to the woman. Nancy came out of the kitchen. "Yes, it just so happened that I had to come back." She waved her hands in the air. "So come in, tell me, what happened?" The woman was getting worried. "Mom, calm down. Nothing happened. Everything's fine, except you're about to become a grandmother. But I don't think that's bad news for you." The girl stood by the table and ran her fingers over the tablecloth. "What? How did this happen?" The mom was shocked because her daughter always was. "Look, she checked 100 times before she did anything. Don't you know how this happens? A man and a woman meet, and then she stops talking." "Yeah, I know how it happens. How it happened for you," sighed the mother. But she realized there was nothing she could do now. The only thing to do was to wait for the deadline and then bring up a grandson or granddaughter. "Mom, everything will be all right." The daughter hugged her mom. "What about your work?" turned to her woman. "Nothing yet, but I think, with the recommendations that I was given from the old place of work, I'll be taken." The girl was sure of it. "That's great. When they day with it while the term is small, you have to go to settle," her mom had told her. Nancy had done just that, but now she wasn't accepted. "Nancy, don't worry. As soon as you have a baby, be sure to come to us, and we will take you in." The head doctor told her, "I will." Surely she promised him, though she thought she would not be taken anywhere now. It was no use. They lived in a small apartment where the girl had grown up. Now only her mother brought money into the house. It turned out that Nancy was sitting on her neck. "Mama, don't you worry. When the baby is born, I'll definitely go to work, and we'll have everything." She told the woman, "I'm not worried. I know you're a hard worker, and you'll do whatever you set your mind to. You'll do it." Her mother would come up to her and give Nancy a hug, and that's exactly what she needed from her. Time passed quickly, and now she's in the last month of her pregnancy. Everything had been fine up to that point. So Nancy didn't even think she would have any complications. She did. Everything was fine. She was seen at the same hospital where she came to apply for a job. The doctors made her feel welcome. They knew that perhaps the girl would become their future colleague. A wonderful baby boy was born, who was named Charles. When Nancy saw him, she stopped doubting. If before she had any doubts about whether she was doing it for nothing or not, now she was sure that it was her son, and she would do everything to make him stand on his feet. Grandmother as well as mother doted on her grandchildren. When Charles was 8 months old, Nancy received a phone call. The head doctor told her that if she was going to go to work for them, she had to do it now. The mother turned to the woman that my kin, she was always ready to come to her daughter's aid. "They're calling me to go to work. But to do that, you need to stay with Charles," she said. "Sure. What are you talking about? I'll stay." The woman worked in a heavy industry, and now on some level she was even glad that she would have to quit. Nancy started work as she had expected. She was well received. Everyone socialized with her. The employees helped each other with everything. At first, the girl was put as an assistant surgeon. She understood a lot about it, so it could not be otherwise. Time passed. The son grew up. Nancy worked. When Charles was 2.5 years old, the women decided it was time for him to go to kindergarten. There's a regime with his father and everything else. There were practically no lines in those days, so the boy went there with his peers. "So, Nancy, how is your work there?" her mother asked her. "You know, it's fine," she said. "I don't get to say hello." The woman sighed and sat down on a stool. "What's wrong with you? Why didn't you say anything?" The daughter was surprised then. "What to say? I thought it would go away, but it doesn't go away," the woman said sadly. "So I'll talk to the head doctor, and we'll probably put you in our hospital," Nancy told her. The mother didn't mind, but she didn't want to go to the hospital. But once Nancy had made up her mind, she had to follow through. The woman was admitted. It was mostly Nancy herself who took care of her. Of course, she couldn't stay in the hospital overnight. When she was on duty, she'd go home to her son. And when she was on duty herself, then both her son and she were all at Nancy's room. The woman was discharged. She saw that the girl was crying. She realized that no pills, no surgery, nothing would no longer help her mother, and barked out of herself for having missed the moment when the disease had just begun. "Daughter, don't get upset. Everything will be fine," her mother told her. "Mother, I blame myself for the state you are in now." At first, the daughter cried at the psychiatric hospital, but then she could no longer hold back her tears when she talked or looked at her mother. That day, they escorted Charles to September 1st. He stood at the line so beautiful, so happy. Grandma was already getting around, but Nancy couldn't deny her that last opportunity to be happy for her grandson. She got a wheelchair from the hospital, put her mother in it, and drove her. And that same evening, she felt sick. "Grandma, please open your eyes." Sitting and crying beside the bed was the grandson. The mother came running to Nancy's screams. She saw that the woman was no longer with them. She took her son by the hand and led him out of that room, and went to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and wept bitterly. Then there was a funeral. Charles cried a lot there too. He couldn't understand what had happened to his grandmother. He asked her to get up, but she would never get up again. Nancy realized that now all the burdens of raising a child and everything else would fall on her shoulders. When the boy was in elementary school in 4th grade, Nancy was offered a promotion. She had finally become a real surgeon, and she herself had some assistants. It couldn't have been more gratifying. But at the same time, the work was multiplied. The son became more and more independent. He could prepare his own lunch and dinner often, because his mother was almost always away. She would come running in the morning. She managed to sleep for a few hours while Charles was at school. Then she tried to pay attention to her son somehow. They'd do things together. They'd do homework. They'd go out. But it was very rare. Of course, Nancy thought about all this, that you can't let things go. But she couldn't help it. By this time, she had never met anyone. Although there had been suitors, men confessed their love to her, gave her flowers, called her for a date, but she chose work and her son, realizing that if she got a man, she wouldn't have enough energy for anything. One day, Nancy was returning from night duty and saw several young men in front of the entrance. She went over. One of the guys was her Charles. "What are you doing here?" she asked him. "Oh, Mom, come home. I'll be right up," he answered her, staggered. She realized she'd missed something, and her son might have gotten mixed up with some bad company. "No, I told you right now we're going home together." She took him by the sleeve of his jacket and dragged him toward the driveway. "Get off." He yanked his arm out. "How do you talk to your mother?" She didn't get it. "As I want, so I talk," he answered defiantly. Nancy thought the boy didn't want to appear weak in front of his classmates and friends, or worse, a mama's boy. And the woman also realized at that moment that the kid was going through transition. She was on her way home. Tears dripped from her eyes. Nancy realized to herself that she had devoted herself to her work and paid little attention to her son. And now, when Charles came up to the apartment and sat beside her on the couch, she tried to talk to him as gently as she could. "Charles, you realize that times are hard right now. If you keep living like this, you're not going to make it," she told him. "Mom, why didn't you tell me this when I was growing up?" Only now when I've already done something wrong. Or maybe I did it to spite you, to draw your attention to myself. He said it with a hint of anger in his voice. I'm sorry, darling, but I'm doing the best I can for us. I work. I bring money into the house. If it wasn't for me, who would do it? She told him while she was crying. The son went to bed, and when he woke up, apparently, he thought about everything. He went to his mother and hugged her. I'm sorry, he said to her, and she saw that he really said it from the bottom of his heart. Well, it's all right. Sit down at the table. She said it for him. She grabbed her keys, grabbed her purse, and headed out. Are you going back to work? Charles asked her. But you wouldn't understand. It's my job. It brings us income. That's why you have things. Everything else is food on the table, she told him. The guy didn't argue. But now he didn't do anything out in the open anymore. Everything on the sly so his mother wouldn't find out. Before graduating from high school, the guy slipped to a C, and his mother had to take a vacation to sit with him at lessons and pull him up. Have you been doing so well all these years? Look at this. She opened the diary in front of him, which is full of twos and various notes from teachers. Oh, Mom, who needs this school? He said. Well, you don't need it, but I do. There's only a little bit left. Try harder, she asked him. And Charles tried. He had a few C's on his diploma, but he had graduated. And now he and his mom were standing at the line, and it was graduation. Do you remember when her son turned to her? What did she ask him? Like when we were standing at the line, when I went to first grade. And Grandma was with us, Charles muttered to her. Nancy realized the exact moment she had missed the child. That now that so many years had passed, he still remembered the grandmother he loved so much. Nancy, would you come into my office, please? The head of the hospital asked her. Sure. Something's wrong. She wanted to know now. How do you release me? Or I'll wait for you at my place, and you'll find out calmly. The man answered her. She did not understand what to expect from this conversation. Usually the chief physician's office was not summoned just like that. Nancy stepped over the threshold. She tried not to look at the man sitting behind the desk. Have a seat, the man in the white coat told her. She sat down on a chair that was near the desk. So, Nancy, I'd like to offer you the position of chief of surgery, the head doctor said. That she was very surprised, because there were no prerequisites for it. Why are you so surprised? You are an excellent surgeon, and I think you can handle being in charge of a few more surgeons. He smiled. Good, she nodded. Does that mean you're in? Well, yes, it's worth a try. And now that she had a new position, and she realized that the salary would be higher, the woman decided to sell the apartment they were living in now and buy something bigger. Charles, what do you think? She asked her son. I'm all for it, he answered. The young man was preparing to enter the institute. Of course, his mother had chosen him, but he was just as much as she didn't mind giving it a try. Now that the apartment was bigger than Nancy's, it seemed to breathe more freely. Charles was away studying, so she missed him a lot. But the boy had promised her he'd come over more often, and he kept his promise. At one point, he didn't come alone, but a girl was with him. Mom, don't be surprised. It's Miranda. We're friends. The boy told her. I'm not surprised, his mom replied. But of course, she thought to herself that her son could have told her earlier that he had started dating a girl. Today, they sat for a while, and then the woman had to run out for the night shift. Charles and Miranda met only a few months ago. They were studying at the same institute, and one day their groups were brought together for a class together. There they met eyes. The guy didn't realize what had happened to him. He just saw her and fell in love. Can I meet you? He caught up with her in the hallway after class. She turned to him. Hi, I'm Charles, he said, smiling. I'm Lilia, she answered calmly. Nice to meet you. You have such a beautiful name, the young man said then. You have a nice one too. It was obvious that she did not mind this acquaintance. Afterwards, they went to a cafe. The guy treated the girl with sweets, ice cream, cakes, And when it became clear that they lived in the same dormitory, it became fun. "How come I've never seen you before?" Charles asked. "I don't know. I've never seen you either." She laughed. From that moment, the young man and the girl began to prepare for subjects together, to go to the institute and back. But on one of the days there was an unpleasantness. Girlfriends invited the girl to a birthday party. "Will you come with me?" she asked the young man. "Look, probably not. What would I do there? I don't know anyone." "Okay, I'll go alone then. I hope you don't mind," she said and shrugged her shoulders. "Sure, go," he answered her. That evening, they went out that night at Miranda's friend's house. Her parents weren't home, and they had set up there unbeknownst to her. But in the middle of the night, perhaps the neighbors called or the parents themselves decided to come back. They came home and saw a horrible scene. 4 girls who were friends just lying around. A birthday party. Not only were they celebrating with pies and salad, but they'd bought hard liquor. "What's going on here?" Father asked sternly. At that moment, the girlfriends stood up. They were escorted out of the house. The girl had nowhere to go, so she went to the dormitory. The janitor saw her there. And the next day, everything was known at the institute. The scandal was hushed up, but the girl was expelled, and now she was studying at a local school. Of course, it was not as prestigious as the institute, but at least it was something. "So why didn't your parents intervene?" was Nancy curious when her son told her the story. "Because I don't have any. My father's out there somewhere, but nobody knows where he is. And my mother was stabbed in a fight by a roommate she'd been living with for years," Miranda told her and tilted her head. "God, what scary stories have you had in your life?" Nancy crossed herself. "To us now, when we graduate, I think we will come to our town and live here." Looked the son at his mother. "Yes, of course, I don't mind." Glory was happy that her child trusts her and they want to live in her apartment. Now, as long as they were home almost every weekend. Miranda was always there for Charles. The woman liked the girl. She was a homemaker, did everything around the house, never sassy, never rude. So she took her in like family. "Mom, we'll probably get married," said to her one day Charles, "You've graduated from the institute. What's left?" She pointed to his fingers. Indeed, Charles had only a few months left to study. Then there was practice, defense, state exams, and the diploma was in hand. Here at the institute, Charles studied differently than at school, took everything more seriously. He realized that his future career would be connected with it. So he didn't rest. Graduation was over, and Charles and Miranda went to his mother's house. They were living here now. "Okay, guys, come on. You wanted to get married. And while it's summer, we've got to make the most of it. Warmth, berries, different vegetables. We got it all. We've got it all. So don't delay. Go to the registry office and apply. Mommy, you better kiss her on the cheek, son." There weren't many relatives who could be invited to the wedding. Friends of the young man, and the girl was also few. So the mother suggested celebrating the wedding at home. But home is home, Charles shrugged. On the appointed day, Miranda went to her room to put on her dress. It wasn't even a wedding dress, but a simple white floor-length dress that was fitted to her figure. "What a beautiful dress you have," mouthed Nancy, when she saw her future daughter-in-law. "Charles gave it to me," she replied. "Look, I've got a present for you," said Nancy. "What is it?" The girl didn't understand. Why would she want to give it now? "Look." The woman opened the slate and took out from there a snow-white hat, to which a veil was sewn. "What a beautiful thing," Miranda said at the time. "Yes, that's what we used to take on a trip to a foreign country. I bought one for myself there. I don't know why or where I wanted to go in it, but now I realize why I did it." Nancy placed the hat on the girl's head, and she became even more festive, even more like a bride. They went to the registry office, and the young people signed. The guests gave flowers, congratulated. It was possible to go home. They could go home, where Nancy had already set the tables. Everything went very cheerfully. Toasts were said. There were some contests. When the guests had gone, Nancy collected all the dishes, took them into the kitchen, and began to wash them. "Let me help you." Miranda came over. "Oh, come on. Go on. You've got a young husband there." Nancy laughed at her. "What are you doing? Look at this mountain of dishes." "I'll help," said the girl. Together, they did it quickly. Charles joined them at the very end. He took towels and wiped the plates and glasses. All was well with the young family. Charles got a very good job. Of course, not without his mother's help. He was now earning good money and also had weight in the community. When 2 years had passed since the wedding, Nancy called Miranda to talk to her. "Daughter, you're not doing well with the children," she told her. "I don't know," shrugged the one. "Maybe go to the hospital to get checked out," her mother-in-law suggested to her. "Wait, we are still young. Everything will be in time." Miranda didn't want to find out there was something wrong with her. "All right. Well, don't let it be too late," Nancy warned her. And then Charles was offered a position in some distant city. "Where is this?" Was Nancy looking at him? "Oh, come on, Mom. It's a city of millions. Things will be very different there," he said. And now they were getting ready to leave. "Miranda, why aren't you going?" My mother-in-law was surprised. "We decided that I'll go first. I'll get settled there, and then I'll come." "Miranda," Charles replied. Understandably, there was little joy, because Nancy realized she would not be alone. It wasn't until her son left that her mother learned the real reason why Miranda was staying here. "Mom, I want to talk to you," said her daughter-in-law to her, and led her to the sofa for both of them to sit down. "What's wrong? Didn't you understand? I'm expecting a baby," said the daughter-in-law. "Well, that's good news. That's good news." She jumped up off the couch. Nancy started pacing the room. "You realize that this is not a good time to have children. I wanted to ask you to arrange for me to have an abortion," Miranda said. Scary words for Nancy. "Are you completely skillful? What kind of abortion?" "Not just over my dead body," insisted the woman. After that, Miranda continued to live with Nancy. She and Charles called, texted. They never spoke again. When the day of the birth came, Nancy was there for her. She helped with everything. And when the baby was born, she was practically the first one to hold him. Miranda will call it. She walked up to her sister-in-law and handed the baby over. "Jacob," she answered. "Oh, what a name," said the woman. And Charles came up with it. The daughter-in-law looked at the child and realized that she would have to stay here for at least another year. "Don't worry, I'll help with everything. I'll be there for you," her mother-in-law reassured her. "I'm not worried," the girl sighed. And then when they got home, it started. Nipples, diapers, skates, hospitals, whatever. When Jacob was a little over a year old, Nancy came home from work and saw her suitcases packed in the hallway. "Where do you think you're going?" She looked at her daughter-in-law. "Mom, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to my husband," Miranda told her. "What about Jacob?" The woman looked at her fearfully. "Jacob is staying with his grandmother," Miranda said. She took her suitcases, opened the door, and left the apartment. But how could it be? Nancy stood in the hallway, confused. She didn't have a job after all. She didn't need one at all. A small child who would stay with her. But there was nothing left to do. So Nancy went to the room where the little boy was sleeping. "But hello, my darling. What are we going to do with you?" She sat down beside his crib and patted his back. Since Jacob didn't go to kindergarten yet, and they hadn't gotten a prescription yet, Nancy realized that she would not be able to handle either Jacob or the job, if she did both. So she went to the head doctor and asked for a leave of absence. "Sure, Nancy, look, how many years have you worked? Never taken that vacation. And if you did, you went out almost every day," the man told her. He would have sent her himself, but she never agreed. "Thank you." Nancy thanked him then. The woman came home. She did everything for her grandson, cooking for him, washing, ironing, doing what his mother should be doing now. But what? Jacob dance. We got a ticket to kindergarten, she told him then. The boy smiled. And so the next day in the morning they go there. For 2 weeks, the grandmother took her grandson to kindergarten. When the adaptation passed, she realized that now Jacob would stay in the kindergarten from 8 to 5. It was possible to go to work, but what would happen with night duty? She did not understand. At first, the woman left her grandson with a neighbor, a girlfriend, or someone else. The older Jacob got, the worse and worse his temper got. He was disobedient. No words could work on him. In kindergarten, he fought all the time. When he was in the older group, he could bite. His parents were always complaining about him. Nancy didn't know what to do, and she found only one way out of this situation: to leave work. Everyone saw her off, even those who were no longer working. She cried for how many years she had given to this profession. And now, it would seem, there is still strength, but it is necessary to leave. Don't be upset. Everything will be fine. Take care of your grandson's upbringing. Don't think about anything. Her colleagues told her. Okay, thank you, she replied. Now the woman was at home. Apart from raising her grandson, she did nothing else, but it took up so much time and energy. And she was constantly worried about him, nervous. It raised her blood pressure. When Jacob was in 4th grade, she received a phone call. Hello, she said excitedly into the phone, realizing that the class teacher wouldn't just call. Nancy, what's wrong? Jacob is fighting with the seniors again. His parents want to talk to you. The woman was telling her. Of course I'll be there, Nancy worried. And the next day, she went to the principal's office, where the other kids' parents were waiting for her. The woman was so worried that her blood pressure was up, and she thought she just wouldn't make it to school. They were sitting in the office. The principal was saying something. The other parents were saying something too. But Nancy didn't understand anything right now. When the principal noticed this, he quickly called an ambulance. The paramedics came straight to the school. Nancy was taken away. She was admitted to the hospital. Oh, I can't go to the hospital, she said. I've got a little grandson. I've got to look after him. Then the doctor went to meet her. He gave her a drip, gave her an injection, and let her go home in the evening on the condition that tomorrow she would come again and spend the day here. The older Jacob got, the worse and worse he got. Nancy didn't understand at all how normal parents with normal upbringing could raise a child like that. In 7th grade, he started smoking. His grandmother immediately noticed the smell of tobacco from him. It got even worse. Nancy called her son repeatedly. Charles, do you realize what's going on here with your son? I can't rein him in at the wrong age. I've got heart palpitations. I'm always worried, nervous. She told him. Mom, you understand. I can't come now, he answered. He and his wife only sent money to the grandmother and did nothing else, as if it was not theirs. It was the son at all. And Nancy continued to raise Jacob. She did everything she could to keep him in the apartment. Sometimes she wouldn't even let him go to school, so he wouldn't do anything wrong. But he still found ways to see his friends. Jacob, I can't take it anymore, his grandmother told him once. The kid was in 9th grade. That's all I need. I'm gonna finish 9th grade, and I'm gonna leave. He told her. Where will you go? How will you go? She made big eyes and her heart started beating faster again. I'm going to leave school to go on with my life. Of course I'll be at your place, because I have nowhere else to go. Jacob didn't seem to be talking. I made a condition. What school? Jacob, my family. You have to go to the 10th grade, finish normal school, go to the institute, then work. Grandma read it. Who needs your institute now? Did you look at her? Everyone always needed it. The woman didn't understand why he was so stubborn. Grandmother sighed, but there was nothing she could do. Now at her age, she realized that she was no authority to her grandson. Probably not to her son either, because in all the years they had been away, they had never once come to visit mother and son. The grandmother didn't know where they were at all. Jacob went to college. as he wanted to. He wasn't paying any attention. What was his grandmother telling him? What did she want? What was she doing? The most important thing was to have a place to sleep. In the morning, his grandmother would make him some breakfast. He would wash his face, leave, and come back either late in the evening or quite at night, and sometimes he could stay up until morning. It made Nancy's heart pick up again. She knew she should go to the hospital, but she didn't because she realized her grandson would be alone again. Somehow she wanted to do something and couldn't remember. Nancy sat down on the couch. She looked out the window and went over in her head what she had planned an hour ago, but couldn't remember it. And then she began to notice that she was starting to have some memory lapses. She forgot her sister-in-law's name. When a neighbor asked her, she couldn't remember where the threads were in the house. Now the woman became afraid to go out on the street, because once when she went out and then came back home, she mixed up the entranceway and entered a completely different apartment number, also as if to erase from memory. She reflexively went up to the floor she lived on, wanted to open the door, but not the one she lived in. "What do you want here?" "Did a man open it then?" "I live here," said Nancy. "No, you're confused. I live here." I slammed that door in her face. She came out of the driveway and was spotted by Nancy's neighbor. "What are you standing there for?" She came up to her. Molly. Nancy exhaled a sigh of relief at what she recognized. "Molly. Thank goodness, at least I remember you," she muttered. And they hugged. "Did something happen to you?" Molly asked her. "Yes, I did. I got the wrong entrance and went into the wrong apartment." She told her, "Look, you can't go out alone right now. What if you go out and then forget where you live and never come back?" Her neighbor warned her. Today she took her to her apartment. Jacob could see that something was wrong with Grandma, but he didn't ask her anything, and she didn't tell him either. When he had almost finished his education at the college and was about to receive his diploma, Jacob met a young girl. Obviously, he had nowhere to take her, so he brought her to his grandmother's house. "Meet Kelly. This is Kelly," he said as they entered the apartment. He gestured to the girl to develop and walked to his room. "Are you going to eat?" asked him Nancy. Now practically all over the house where the woman lived there were notes spread out. What to cook, what to say, where to go, what to take. If she remembered, she wrote it down immediately. In those moments when her memory came back, she would try to quickly write something down or think about something. Before, when she worked at the hospital, she never thought this could happen to her. Now Jacob she remembered and knew. But Kelly was a new person to her almost every day. "Nancy, hello," the girl said to her as they bumped into each other in the hallway. "So who's bouncing off her? Here we go again. Jacob, your grandmother, has gone crazy. Don't pay attention to her," the young man kept telling her. "You see, I don't like all this there. She did this here. She forgot to do that. We can't get rid of her somehow." Kelly asked him once. "You what?" "That's my grandmother. And if my parents come over, what am I gonna tell them? My fiancé didn't like Grandma, so we put her in a nursing home or something," he told her. "But no, maybe she'll go to the hospital for a while. They'll fix her up, do whatever she needs." The girl offered another option. "No, let her live in her room, walk around the house. She's doing fine here." For the first time in his life, Jacob took his grandmother's side. He saw how she suffered, how she was always looking for something, even though it was on the surface. "Okay, I didn't know what else to say." Kelly, she kept looking at Grandma, and no to help her, just grinned and went off to her room. Jacob needs to go to the store, Grandma was telling him. She definitely needed an escort because she had already tried to leave the house alone and then barely found her apartment. So now she had an alarm clock set on a certain day, at a certain time, when she had to go shopping. She also had the same alarm for the pills she needed to take. "Okay, wait," he answered her and started to get ready. Right now, though the guy didn't feel like it. He would get dressed and take his grandmother to wherever she needed to go. Just recently, the woman had given her grandson money to buy himself a car, and now he could get around in it. They went with the grandmother to the store, bought groceries, brought them home, laid them out, and only then did he go somewhere else. Kelly stayed home most of the time while Jacob was working or out with his friends. She spent all day talking on the phone or lying in front of the TV. After Jacob and Grandma came home from the store, Kelly figured out what he could do with Grandma so he wouldn't have to answer to anyone. But the girl didn't say anything to anyone. They continued to live all together. Now the girl, so that Nana would remember her and not scare her every time she tried to be around. She helped Nancy cook peeled potatoes, cut onions, and did everything her grandmother asked her to do. No one understood a thing. And when the next time came to go to the store, Jacob was not home. So the girl offered the woman her help. They walked to the store together. Kelly took the basket, gave it to the woman, and when she disappeared between the shelves, Kelly safely left the supermarket, leaving Nancy here alone. But the woman didn't know about it yet, so she strolled calmly through the store and thought nothing of it. When the basket was full, and she had to go to the checkout to pay. And then the woman stood up in confusion and started looking around. Now it seemed to her that she had come here with someone, but she couldn't remember with whom. And what should she do now? She doesn't know. And she didn't know where she was either. Nancy put the grocery basket on the floor. She just turned her head back and forth, thinking that her grandson had lingered somewhere near some shelf and would come to her now. Nancy walked between the rows, looking for Jacob. She wanted to shop to ask someone, but Nancy couldn't afford it. There are so many people here. She was just afraid of them all. Some time passed, but there was still no one. Then she walked out of the store to avoid attracting any attention. Kelly went back home. She was not to say happy, but happy that she had come up with such a plan. And now, even when Jacob came home, she would tell him that the grandmother had left the house alone and had not returned to the girl. It seemed like she had everything planned out. And most importantly, the plan was perfect. She went to the kitchen, decided to cook a holiday dinner. The girl knew only 2 recipes that she had seen her mom make when there was an event in the family. It was French meat and manti. But if with the meat Kelly could still somehow manage, she doubted about the manti. The girl pulled the meat out of the refrigerator, peeled potatoes, nabbed tomatoes. The sauce was here, as was the cheese. All that was left was to assemble everything, put it on a baking tray, and wait for it to be ready. While the dish was cooking, Kelly went to her room, changed out of the refrigerator, got a bottle of wine, sat down at the table, and waited for her young man. Jacob returned. He saw Kelly doing something in the kitchen. He got curious. He went over there. When he saw what she was cooking, he was even more surprised. "Is it a holiday?" Did he ask her first? "No, I just wanted to make you happy, to sit together, to talk, so to speak, romance." She stood up and wanted to kiss him. "Where's Grandma?" he asked her, and also saw only 2 glasses on the table. But why? If we're celebrating something, why not the 3 of us? "I don't know." Kelly shrugged and turned away from the table as if it didn't concern her at all. She started slicing bread, spreading it out on a plate, so she wouldn't have to look the young man in the eye. She just wouldn't turn around. "I don't know how. We all live in the same apartment. Where could she have disappeared to?" He smirked. "I don't know. Go look in her room," Kelly muttered. She realized now that her plan wasn't as perfect as she thought. "Why are you telling me this? Grandma's coat is gone. Her shoes are gone too. Is she sitting there in her room with her clothes on looking at her? Look, why are you picking on me about your grandmother? I don't know where she is or what she might be. She went to a neighbor's house. Maybe somewhere else." Kelly was talking about. She was ready to burst into tears. "What do you mean she left?" Jacob asked her sternly. "How should I know? I was in the kitchen, and maybe she got dressed and went out." Kelly raised her voice. "She can't leave the house alone without you or me," he told her, and was starting to get nervous. But Jacob, Kelly walked up to him and wanted to hug him. But the young man took her hands away. Either you tell me the truth now, or I'll find out anyway." The young man looked at her with anger. "Yes," she said, "let's go to the store. I thought it wouldn't be a big deal if she went alone, so I let her go." Kelly made innocent eyes, and then she started to cry. "How could you let that happen? Where can we find her now?" Jacob realized that if something happened to his grandmother, his parents would not forgive him. And how will he look himself in the eyes after that? The guy quickly grabbed his jacket, got dressed, and went. It was very cold outside. He realized that his grandmother did not have such a warm coat, and she would not be able to stay outside for long. He drove to the very supermarket that they used to go to with her all the time. No matter how many times he ran around the store, asked the guards and clerks for people, no one had seen the small, unpleasant grandmother. No one could tell him anything now. Jacob had never been as worried about the grandmother before as he was now. He realized that the helpless old woman was alone in the city. She knew no one, and even if she did, she might not know where to go. It would be getting dark soon now, and where would she be at night? Jacob drove through the streets that were closest to the store where he assumed Grandma was, but never saw anyone. Jacob returned home. He was very angry. "How's it going? Any luck finding him? Did Kelly meet him?" "No," Jacob mumbled. "Let's go to my favorite. I made dinner for us. You don't seem to be having any trouble at all." I looked at her. "Oh, you'd think. You loved your grandmother so much that you're worried now." Puckered my lips. "Kelly, yeah, realize this is her apartment. Now my parents are gonna call and ask how Grandma's doing. And what am I gonna tell them?" He asked her that question again. "You won't say anything. You'll say she's asleep." The girl always had some excuse for everything. "You are a hardy man," Jacob told her. He looked at the girl and couldn't understand how she could be like that. "You'd think you'd better remember how you talked to her, what you said and what you did." She reminded him of his behavior. What did it matter now? What was already important? What was happening now? He turned on the kettle, poured himself some coffee, sat down at the table in the kitchen, and began to think about what he should do next. All night, the young man agonized without sleep. The next day in the morning, he went not to work, but to the police. He had to write a report on the disappearance of a man. "Hello." He went into one of the offices. "Come in." A man in a uniform was looking at him. "I want to write a missing persons report on my grandmother." The young man sat down on the table and stared absent-mindedly at the one sitting behind the desk. "Okay, tell me in detail, what, when, and how," spoke the interlocutor and took a paper to write down. "I don't know what kind of illness she has, but she, if she leaves the house, then afterwards cannot remember where to return," Jacob muttered. "When did this happen?" asked the employee leading questions. "Yesterday afternoon," Jacob answered him, and he thought to himself that now he would be told that he had invented something and that he should wait. After a while, Grandma would come back, but he wasn't ready to back down. "So, here's some paper, write a statement, and if you have a picture, and we'll start looking," said the young man behind the desk. "Okay." Jacob wrote down everything he had learned yesterday from Kelly. After that, he pulled the photograph out of his pocket. Of course, it was not the first fresh, and the grandmother on it was even younger than she was now, but he had no other. They took all the documents from the boy, promised to call if anything came up, and now Jacob was on his way home again. "But how's it going?" Kelly asked him. "Is it going well? How's it going? How's it going? I'm not making any progress. And get away from me. I don't want to talk to you yet," he told her irritably, and he went to his room. He had to think again. "Jacob, I'm so sorry, please. I really didn't think it would be so serious," she answered, and again she made eyes and tried to hug the young man. "And what did you think? If she goes out into the yard and then cannot go into her driveway, now she will reach from the store to our house or what?" I didn't understand. I don't know what I was thinking at the time. "I'm sick of your grandmother with what she does at home." Kelly was angry. "This is her house. This is her apartment. She earned it. She bought it. She raised my father here. She and my mother lived here. And then me. At that moment, Jacob thought about it. But in fact, he had only seen his parents in pictures on video and heard their voices on the phone. But he had never seen them in real life. It made him feel bad. But now all his thoughts were occupied only with the fact that he had to find his grandmother. Only she was always there for him. She forgave all faults, was always ready to support, and most importantly loved him. And what if those to whom he applied quickly find out everything and find her? But she couldn't have gotten far. And the city here is not very big. The girl answered calmly. And if something happened to her, what if she's cold? How long has it been? And she's in such light clothes. Maybe she was hit by a car, and now she's lying in some morgue. He stopped, didn't he? He went to the stores, looked for her around town. But he didn't call any hospitals or morgues or anything to ask if they'd received a woman like that. The guy immediately grabbed the phone and began to call all these instances, but his grandmother was nowhere to be found. Tonight he went to bed because he realized that fatigue had come over him so much that tomorrow he would not be able to do anything. At night, the young man had various nightmares. He woke up several times in a cold sweat. Kelly was sleeping peacefully next to him. "And how can you sleep peacefully?" he said to her aloud. But the girl only rolled over to the other side and kept sniffling. Further in the morning, also no news, just silence. Then Jacob himself called the local office and found out how the case of finding his grandmother was progressing. "We're doing everything we can." That was the only answer he heard. This did not satisfy him very much. So Jacob started looking into trying to find his grandmother on his own. And Nancy, when she left the store, walked down the sidewalk. The woman thought she should at least recognize her house or yard. At some point, it seemed to the woman that she recognized the area, that perhaps it was her yard. She went there, went to one of the entrances, and sat down on a bench. There were some people here. Nancy sat and watched them, thinking that maybe if she didn't recognize the people, they would recognize her and someone would come up. But no one did. They all walked past. It was getting dark. She got up and went to another yard. And this house seemed familiar to her. She sat down on the bench again. It was getting very cold in the evening. The woman laid down. She wanted to go somewhere else, but at that moment such a strong wind blew. A blizzard was beginning. Nancy looked around, and she could think of nothing but to go into the entryway. The woman went in there, stood there while stomping her feet, because it was not so warm here either. And suddenly, the door opened and a little boy ran in. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" Looked at her surprised. "Hi, what's your name?" She leaned toward him. "Mason," he told her. He saw that she was so cold she couldn't even speak clearly. Her lips were blue. She couldn't get a tooth on a tooth. "I'm Nancy." She smiled. "Why are you standing here?" He was curious. "Why are you running so late? Look what's going on outside." She wagged her finger at him. "I went to buy bread." He showed her a bag with a loaf of bread in it. "Where's your mom? You can't let a little boy like that go shopping for bread, can you?" She stood there and told him off. "My mom is sick," he said. "She's sick." "That's too bad." Nancy grinned. She looked at the door of the entryway. Behind it, she could hear the wind howling outside. She stood there remembering what this boy's name was. Who was he anyway? "Nancy, don't you have a home?" the boy asked at the same time. "No, it's somewhere, but I don't know where." She was almost crying. "Come and visit us." He held out his hand to her. "Can we?" she asked him. "Why not? You'll freeze and die here." He answered her. Nancy grinned, but followed the boy because she had no other choice. She entered the apartment. The place smelled strongly of medicine. It was like something popped into Nancy's head, and she remembered. But what did she remember? She didn't know. Couldn't get a grip on the thoughts that were flying through her head very quickly. "Come on, let's go through." The boy saw how cold the grandmother was. They came with her into the kitchen. He immediately put the kettle on the stove, poured her hot tea, and only then ran into the room to his mother. "Mom, do we have guests?" he said to the woman. "What guests?" She didn't understand. At certain moments, she began to cough very badly. And for some reason it was then that Nancy felt good and happy. Some memory lived in her, but she couldn't remember it. "Nancy, have you had your tea?" Jacob asked her. Did she look at him when he approached her? "No, I'm Mason," he told her. "Mason." Again the woman looked at him with empty eyes. He took her hand and led her into his mom's room. "Here, Mom, meet Nancy. There's a very bad snowstorm outside, and she's a thin little boy, all she could do. And I decided, so she wouldn't die, to take her home," he said. "Hello, come in." The woman coughed again. "Hello." It's like she didn't realize what she was doing here. And why had she come here? She saw a thermometer on the table, some pills. She went over, took the thermometer, and slipped it under the woman's arm. "What are you doing?" She didn't understand. "We're going to change the temperature, and then it'll be clear," she said. It was like a doctor talking. "Nancy, this is my mom, Lisa," said the boy. Yes, your mom will be fine now," said the woman. Lisa realized at that moment that there was something wrong with their guest. "Is your name Nancy?" she asked her. "Yes, Nancy," the woman said. "Tell me, has something happened to you?" Lisa asked quietly, because if she raised her voice, she would immediately start coughing. "I don't know what happened to me. I sat down on a stool." "Mason, why don't you go look in Grandma's pocket? Maybe there's something in there," his mom asked him. Mason went and looked, but there was nothing there. When he entered the room, the woman blossomed into a smile, wiped her hands for a hug. Jacob said to Nancy again, "What do you think I am, Jacob?" "I'm Mason, for the 10th time I'm telling you." The boy couldn't understand what was happening to her. "Nancy, are you lost?" Lisa asked her a question. She'd heard stories of old people losing their memory, leaving their house, and then not knowing where they were going. "Yeah, I can't find my house." Nancy put his head down. "All right, I see. You can stay with us as long as you want. You still have relatives, and someone's gonna put out a BOLO. They'll find you. And if you move around, it's gonna be hard enough," Lisa told her. After that, she thought she should call the local police station to let them know she had a grandmother. "What happened to you?" Nancy asked her, even though she realized that in a few minutes she would forget everything she was going to be told here. "As my son has already told you, my name is Lisa. I used to have a good life. I had a happy family. I was in high school, and I met a young guy. He seemed very nice. Then I went to school. He went to the army. Wires, tears. He didn't believe me that I could wait, but I was not like that. And of course I waited, wrote letters. He came back, proposed to me." Lisa began to tell the story. At this time, Mason sat on his mother's lap. He had never heard the whole story before. Some of it he knew, some of it he guessed, but he had never heard his mother tell it like this. Lisa drained a little for now, then took in a lungful of air to continue her story. She realized that this was eating her up inside, and now to this strange woman, who yet remembered nothing, she could open up and tell what had happened to her. "But Mom, what happened next?" her son asked her. "And when he proposed to me, everything was so romantic. My parents didn't want to let me leave my native village, but my husband wanted to, and we left with him to work in the city. They gave us an apartment." Lisa continued talking. She was silent for a short while because she needed to catch her breath. At that moment, the woman lay back on the pillow and looked at the ceiling. It was obvious that she was having a very hard time, and that the husband had turned out to be a scoundrel. Asked her Nancy, who tried to get into the gist of the conversation, but could do nothing. "No. Then I found out I was pregnant. We were both overjoyed at the news. Our beloved daughter was born. We seem to have a complete good family now. Everything's great. We had an apartment, a job. What more to look forward to, if everything was?" She stopped talking again. Lisa, and then she started coughing. So both Nancy and Mason freaked out. The boy ran into the kitchen, got a glass of water. He stirred something up, lifted his mother up, and gave her a drink. "Wow, you have such a little boy, and already you have to do so much," the woman said. "Yes, because there is no one else to help but him." Lisa didn't agree. She was breathing hard now, and it seemed as if she wouldn't say anything more. "Mom, will you continue?" Her son asked her. "Yes, if you are interested, of course I am." Mason sat up and stared with all eyes. "And then I don't know what happened in our lives. While I was on maternity leave, my husband started coming home on time less and less, and when he did, he made all kinds of excuses. He was at a friend's house, or someone had an emergency. He helped, and then went to a neighboring town to meet his classmates. Even though he'd always studied and lived in this town, I tried to believe him, but at some point it became impossible. He didn't come home for the night on the second day and on the third. And when he came back, I asked him directly about the other woman, and he didn't deny anything. He had indeed had her." Nancy noticed tears running from Lisa's eyes, and now she remembered something too. The same feelings she had had. But when and with whom? Unfortunately, she couldn't remember that. "Yes, it had happened," the woman said briskly. "No, nothing happened then. I decided not to do anything and just let it go. I know the forbidden fruit is sweet, and if you're allowed to do everything, you won't go anywhere." And so it was. We were gone for a few days, and then he came home. Lisa smiled. That he just knocked on the door, came in. Nancy wondered. Just like that. After that, there were apologies and gifts and flowers and all that. Until the daughter turned 12, Lisa went silent again. What happened then? Now Mason was already asking questions because it was also his father, whom he had never seen. He was gone again, this time for good. No matter how many times I called or wrote, he did not answer, did not get in touch. It was just me and my daughter. Before that, I was cut down at work, and I have been sitting at home for a year. I could not find any work. My husband brought some money, but it was not enough for anything. A couple of months after he was gone from our house, I realized I was expecting a second child. Lisa exhaled. There was a whooshing sound coming from her chest. That was me. Asked Mason, who was listening intently to every word. Yes, baby, it was you. Confirmed his mother. And then what happened? And then the worst happened. My daughter demanded that I had an abortion, that we didn't need a child from that man, and we didn't have any money to raise her. I didn't work anywhere. No one would take me if I was pregnant. You have no idea what my daughter screamed at me. She thought that if she had nothing now, then later, when the little child was born, all the attention and purchases would be for him, and she would be left with nothing. A cough began to choke, and so the story had to be interrupted again. Nancy sat staring at one point. She understood how Lisa felt in those moments, but how did she understand it? Right now, it seemed to her that the woman was telling her story, not her own. Well, it's getting late. Let's go to bed. I'll continue the story tomorrow, Lisa said. Again, the coughing began to choke her. Mason stirred something in her glass again. She sipped a little, but it didn't help her this time. Nancy didn't bother to argue. Mason showed her where to lie down, and she shot herself up on the couch and lay down. During the night, she dreamed about something, some people, and she didn't recognize any of them. They were all going somewhere, saying something, doing something to her. In the morning, she woke up. She felt very bad. Her head hurt. Her blood pressure was high. She needed pills, but she didn't know where to get them. Mason, come here. Nancy called out to him. What do you want? He ran up to her. Do you have a first aid kit? She asked him. Yes. A boy ran into the other room and brought back a whole box of pills and various jars. She started looking at the pills and smirked. Realized to herself that she didn't know which pill she should choose. This really annoyed the woman because she knew how annoying all this could get to people. Go ask my mom what pill I should take, she asked him. In a few minutes, the boy returned with some pills in his hands. Nancy drank one. After that, she ran a little. She felt better. She got up and went to the room where Lisa was lying. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." Lisa lay like that. Nancy helped her up. They went to the bathroom, then to the bathtub. Lisa even tried to sit with them in the kitchen, but so far it was very difficult for the woman. Nancy went and found groceries in the refrigerator and made breakfast. At this point, she asked Mason for a pen and paper and wrote down everything she did yesterday. What's the boy running around next to her? His name is Mason. That's why she didn't mix him up today. After breakfast, they all gathered in Nancy's room. I wondered why the boy was home and not going out. Because I don't have the ability to pay for kindergarten and everything that goes with it. The woman said, "Mom, come on, tell the story further," asked her son. "What is there to tell?" The pregnancy went normally. The daughter was completely out of hand. She started doing everything out of spite. Going out, taking someone home. Lisa cried again and waited for him to come into the world. When I was 6 months pregnant, I was admitted to the hospital. And when they took all the tests, the doctor saw that there was something wrong with my body. I couldn't do anything because I could hurt the baby. So I waited, feeling like I was getting worse and worse. And when Mason was born, I had an MRI. Turns out I had some kind of tumor in my larynx. I needed emergency surgery. I had to leave the baby with my big sister and go to the hospital. I heard all kinds of things from my eldest daughter, but I needed to be healthy to raise my second child. The surgery was done, and afterwards I felt very well. I went everywhere with Mason, spent all my time with him. And then I got another infection. I had a slight fever for a long time, and they put me back in the hospital. By now, Lisa was just crying. "Mommy, calm down, please." Her son hugged her. At some point, the eldest daughter found a young man and said that she was going to live with him. That she didn't want to know us at all. She warned me not to give birth, but I didn't listen to her. And so now she was very angry with me and just left the house. Lisa continued to say, "But then, what happened to you after the hospital?" Nancy just asked that's what she wanted to know. And then they told me that the tumor had come back and I was doing badly. They said I had nothing left to live for. Just nothing. Lisa cried and looked at Mason again. Mommy then sobbed in Mason's voice. Lisa cried with him. Even Nancy couldn't help herself at that. "Okay, that's it. Enough of the dampness here." Up she got. She waved away her tears and headed for the kitchen. "Can I help you?" the boy asked her. "Of course," she replied. Together, they began to peel vegetables, cut potatoes, cabbage, all to boil borscht. "Oh, how nice. I haven't had real borscht for a long time," the boy said. "And you've actually eaten it. You're too young for such soup." Nancy smiled softly. "I have. Mom used to make it," he said. After that, they were in the kitchen for a long time, waited until everything was boiling, closed the lid. The soup took place for a while. Then Nancy poured it on plates, all that was ready. "My God, it's delicious. You have golden hands." Lisa looked at her, just because she wanted to call the station and tell them that Grandma was at their house. She'd forgotten all about it. "What about your daughter? Do you have no contact with her at all?" did Nancy ask her when she came in. For some reason, that was the memory that came to her mind now. "Not at all," Lisa admitted to her. "I see," agreed Nancy. Today was the end of her second day living in this apartment. She realized that she probably had someone, and maybe even someone looking for her. But who was it? And how to find them? She had absolutely no idea. Mason was small. Lisa couldn't. So tonight, she went to bed thinking only about whether or not she had relatives. "Lisa, do you mind if I stay a little longer?" Nancy came in the next day. "Do you?" "Of course you do. You're doing us such a favor. You made a nice borscht yesterday, didn't you?" Lisa smiled. Nancy lived in the apartment now. She did a lot of things around the house, cooking, studying. She was enjoying it very much. "Grandma, why don't you and I play a game?" a boy asked her. When she heard that word, she wanted to latch on again to some thought that had flashed through her mind, but she couldn't. "I think I have a grandson too," she said to the boy, "so we should definitely find him." He told her, "Yes, I understand that you must, but I don't know how to do it," sighed Nancy. The woman didn't know why, but she liked sitting next to Lisa. She'd tell her things. They listened to each other. When Nancy had to turn the woman over, she could do it herself. But her strength was so low, she couldn't do anything. One day Lisa had to get an injection. She usually did it herself, but now she asked Nancy to give her an injection in her buttock, because in her leg where she had injected herself, there wasn't a live spot there anymore. It was all bagged up. Nancy came over, took the syringe, drew the medicine, tapped the needle professionally, made sure there was no air left. "Did she inject it like that? I didn't even feel it." "You weren't a medic before, by any chance?" Lisa asked her. "I don't know," said Nancy. "I see. I wish I knew something about you," Lisa said regretfully. Another week passed. It was clear that Nancy herself would not remember anything. She had to be taken to a doctor or something, but who would do it was unclear. Mason only knew where the store was, which was located on the corner of the house. There was no way Grandma could have gotten there on her own. And Lisa couldn't help her, so they all stayed in the same apartment. "Stay with us forever," the boy told her. "But if nobody finds me and nothing happens, then I will have to stay with you," she said and laughed. During this time, she had gotten used to people, and they to her too. Nancy did everything right in the house, never forgetting anything. She had everything signed everywhere, where everything was, what to take, what pills to take, what to put in Lisa's room, and so on. She didn't even think of going out, because she was afraid that she wouldn't find the apartment. Then there was no telling what she would do next. This morning, Nancy woke up out of habit and went to the kitchen to make breakfast for herself and Lisa. For drinking, she opened the refrigerator, took out the eggs, and decided to fry the pieces into cups. She diluted the milk with the eggs. After that, she cut the bread into quarter-wall pieces. Then she tortured all the slices in the mixture. She poured oil on the skillet. Then she took the pieces out one by one and threw them in. It was delicious. It smelled good. Mason came running in. "Nancy, what are you cooking?" he asked her. "You'll see for yourself." She was already making tea in mugs and putting everything on the table. "Oh, it smells so good. I can't wait any longer," the child said. "Mason, you don't go to kindergarten, but you're going to school," a woman asked him once. "Of course I'm going to school. I already know all the letters and I can count to 20. He told her. "Oh, that's good." In the evening, the woman sat at the table with him. She knew that in the evening she might forget everything. So she took out her notebook and wrote down in it that later she should see what Mason could do. After that, they went to the room. Colia treated her to breakfast too. "Could you make me some coffee with milk?" she asked the woman then. "Of course. This is the smallest thing I could do for you." Nancy went quickly to the kitchen so she wouldn't forget anything. After that, she did everything that the lady of the house asked of her, brought it to her. "Thank you so much. I've wanted to do this for so long, but Mason didn't make me do it, and I'm so busy," said Lisa quietly. She and Mason were sitting in the room when they heard Lisa start to cough. "I'm going to dilute her syrup now. Cups," Mason mouthed and ran to the kitchen to get water. "Good." Nancy went to the woman's room. She lifted and head sat comfortably in the bed. Mason at this time brought a glass of water. He added some sort of syrup to it, as he did the rest of the day, and handed it to Mom. It made her breathe easier, but it still didn't make her feel any better. When Nancy saw that Lisa had her eyes closed, she thought she was going to sleep. So she and Mason went into the other room. "Remember you promised me you'd show me what you could do?" Nancy asked him again. "Sure." The boy took out the big alphabet book he had and started showing the woman the letters he already knew, then did the same with the numbers. Nancy could see that this child was truly developed. She only wondered who was practicing with him. That's what I decided to ask him. No one tutored me. I did it on my own, till the batteries ran out. He showed me the alphabet book that had batteries on the back, and when you pressed a letter, it would spell it out. Wow, what a good boy you are, Nancy complimented him. She was so used to this family that she didn't think she'd ever lived anywhere else. It seemed to her that she had always been here. Vidya was like a grandson to her. Every day she took him to the store, forced him, gave him money, and the boy ran. He wasn't used to it. Sometimes Nancy would sit in the kitchen until something rattled or rumbled in the next room. Then she would flinch and remember that she wasn't here alone, that there was someone else. Nancy, Mom's not feeling well again. Mason came to see her this morning. He was almost crying. The woman could see how hard it was for that boy to live. She realized that he was still so young and had taken on such a big responsibility. They were going back into the room to help Lisa again. Today, Nancy saw that the woman was not well at all. She was breathing so hard that it was frightening for her health. After Lisa was feeling better, Nancy decided not to leave her side. She remained sitting in that room. Mason said he was very tired and went to get some sleep. Glory sat up. She was already dozing off in the chair. The woman saw some people in her dream again. They were saying something to her. A young woman threatened her with her finger. But who was it? She didn't understand at all. Nancy heard Mason screaming and opened her eyes. Nancy, look, I'm bad for Mom, he said to her. At that moment, Nancy looked at Lisa and saw that she was not only coughing, but as if she was choking. Mason, quickly call an ambulance, the woman shouted. Mason ran to the phone. It was something he had to do more than once. He dialed the number of the ambulance, said his mom wasn't feeling well, dictated the address. They told him the doctors would be there soon. What to do? He ran around the room, afraid that his mom was going to die. That was the worst thing for the boy. He often thought about it. He even had scary dreams, but he tried to distract himself. As usual, the boy ran to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, added the medicine to it, and they tried to pour it into Lisa's mouth. But it didn't work. Mason, do you have any medical instruments at home? Nancy asked him. What exactly was the boy looking at her for? He didn't know what she was talking about. At that moment, Nancy got up from her chair. She took some alcohol from the nightstand and began to disinfect her hands and vomit on them. Nancy, what are you doing? The boy looked at her. Say, do you have any tools at home? Syringes, a scalpel, or anything like that? The woman spoke quickly. Nancy did not recognize herself. How did she know such words? And why did she need all this stuff anyway? The boy ran out into the hallway. He had brought some sort of suitcase. When Nancy opened it, she was very surprised. It was a set of surgical instruments. She quickly put on gloves, picked up a scalpel, and started touching Lisa's neck. Nancy, what are you doing? The boy was very frightened. So be quiet and come help me, she muttered. Nancy rubbed the alcohol on Lisa's neck. She went lower to the chest, felt everything with her fingers, and turned to the boy Mason. Have you ever had them put an IV in your mom? She asked him. Lisa was already rolling her eyes at this point. She was almost completely white. I don't know who the boy was and sat down on the floor. Now is not the time to be crying. Quickly look for the non-tube that you screw onto the needle when you put in an IV. Nancy said knowingly. Where do we find it? I don't know, hummed the boy. He was really scared. Now, Mason, this is no time to be drooling. Let's do this. She looked in the nightstand herself. There was nothing there. Then she told the boy to get a regular pen. He had brought one and was now standing beside his mom, watching Nancy wanting to make a cut right into her. Please don't, for she will die, shouted the boy to her. So shut up and hold it there. Did she show him where to put his finger? Mason did as the woman said. She wiped the case, the handles with alcohol, and then quickly did something else at the address and inserted the handle. And at that moment, Lisa sighed. No sooner had they done all this than they heard a knock on the door. Mason ran to open it. There were medics standing on the threshold. They entered, saw a woman lying on the bed with a pen sticking out of her throat. "Who did this?" asked one of the men in a very stern voice. Nancy at that moment felt bad that she was suddenly drawn to help. "It's Nancy," Mason responded immediately. The nurse, turning to the woman, held out his hand to her, and when Nancy put hers into his, he shook it firmly. "Woman, did you work as a doctor?" he asked her. "I don't know," replied Nancy. She was sitting back in her chair now, her hands shaking. She knew she had done the right thing, but how did she know that? Nancy had no recollection at all. When the others came in and brought the stretcher with them, they all looked at Nancy respectfully, and when Lisa was already being carried into the ambulance, the one who had come in first looked at Nancy again. "You did the right thing. If it hadn't been for you, she wouldn't have lived to see us," he told her. "Good." The doors closed. The boy and his grandmother were left alone in the apartment. "How did you know all this?" The boy clung to her. "Mason, and if I had known," cried Nancy. She realized that without proper education, she could not have done any of this, and she probably had it. Today, they cleaned up Lisa's room, and the next day they went to see her at the hospital first thing in the morning. The woman was very afraid to leave the house, so she asked Mason for the number of a cab. He quickly went to the neighbor's house and found out. After that, he and Nancy called a car, and now he was to take them exactly to the address. Lisa was lying in bed from her throat already showing fears from home. Nancy smiled at her. Nancy was approached by some woman. Yes, she turned to her and looked at her with a blank stare. "Don't you recognize me?" The nurse smiled. "You know, my grandmother has some kind of disease. She forgets things all the time," said Mason to the one who approached. "So come with me." They left the boy in the room with his mother and walked down the hall. Now Nancy was sitting near some office, waiting for the girl who had greeted her to come out. Not a few minutes later, a man came out of the office. He looked solid and looked at the one who was sitting in the hallway. "Nancy, hello. Why didn't you go to the hospital? When did this happen to you?" He came up to her, took her hands. "I don't know what happened to me." She looked at him. "What about your relatives? Why didn't they do anything?" The man didn't understand. "Don't ask me anything because I can't answer you." She lowered her head and cried. "All right, let's go and have a look at you." He took her to some office. Everyone recognized her. Everyone knew her by name and patronymic. The woman had some MRI procedures, tests, and everything else. And Nancy didn't talk to anyone. She just kept quiet because she didn't recognize anyone who was here. When it was over, the head doctor of the hospital ordered that Nancy be assigned a private room and put her there. "No, I can't leave Mason alone." The woman turned to them. "Don't worry, we'll take care of him," said the man who had met her first. And indeed, there was another bed next to Lisa's, where Mason could sit. The woman needed surgery, so he could be near his mother now. And the boys also showed him where Nancy's room was, so he could go to her too. The head doctor went to his office. He decided that if Nancy wasn't with her relatives, which is possible, they might not know where she was at all. He dialed the woman's home number. "Hello," he heard in the receiver. "Hello, this is James, the head doctor of the hospital where Nancy used to work." He introduced himself. "Hello." On the other end, the young man's voice trembled. "Jacob, I believe it was you who guessed." "A man?" "Yes. Is there something you want to tell me about my grandmother?" he asked, because he wanted to. "Yes, she's in our hospital right now. And if you want, you can come and see her," he said. To him sternly. "Yes, we'll be there right away," he said. "At home." Jacob hung up the phone. He turned to the men. "What happened?" she asked. She had always wondered who the young man was socializing with and what he was doing. But he was hiding everything. "I think we found the grandmother," he answered. But at the same time he smiled. "Who called you?" Kelly jumped up from her seat. Ever since Grandma had been lost, the young people had hardly spoken to each other. Jacob was so resentful of his position that he could not talk to her yet. "So I'll tell you all about it on the way. For now, quickly pack. Take everything you need. We need to find slippers, a robe, some underwear, and take it all to her. She's alone in the hospital. She has no one." Jacob was talking fast. Kelly did as he told her. They got in the car and drove off. In just a short while they were there, Jacob ran down the steps. He couldn't believe it had really happened. And Grandma would be home again now. He promised himself that he would never do to her again what he had done before. James was already waiting for him. "Hello again. Can you tell me where my grandmother is?" he asked. "She's in room 9, the man said. "Really?" For some reason, he despised Jacob. It seemed to him that everything that was happening now was because of him. Jacob and Kelly walked quickly down the hall. He saw room number 9 at the top of the hall. He knocked and opened the door. "Grandma, he said quietly, seeing that the woman was awake. "Who are you?" she asked them as they entered. "Grandma, this is me, Jacob. And this is Kelly, my girlfriend," he told her. "Jacob, you're so small." She couldn't believe her eyes. "Yes, Grandma. I'll always be little to you. I'm sorry." He knelt beside her bed. Nancy was lying on the bed. She was looking at the ceiling and crying at that moment. "Why are you crying?" Kelly asked her. "Imagine, you're walking around. Everyone recognizes you, saying hello, talking about something, and you don't remember or know anyone." She wiped her eyes with a towel that was lying there. "Don't worry, everything will be fine," Vita replied. After that, they started coming to the woman every day, bringing something, talking. Nancy already recognized them, but sometimes she still had to remind her who came to her. After a week, Mason came running into her room and told her that her mom had had surgery and was doing much better than she had before. They went into Lisa's room together. She was Mason herself. Yes, and Nancy were all happy because it had turned out this way, and not any other way. That's when James came in. "Nancy, I got a message from the ER that you did everything you could to keep that woman alive," looking at her and smiling. "Yes, that's what they said," confirmed what Mason said. "And how did you manage that with your illness?" The head doctor wondered then. "I don't know. But the moment I saw her eyes roll back and she went practically white, she stopped breathing. It was like my brain shut down and my hands started doing everything." The woman was telling him. "Yeah, it's true what they say. It's like riding a bike. Once you learn how to ride a bicycle, you can do it all your life." James smiled. He walked over to Nancy, put his arm around her shoulders, and "There are visitors again," he said to her. "Jacob," the woman said. She already remembered him and knew him. "Yes, your grandson and his fiancée," James said. "Oh, then I must go to them." She looked at Lisa. She blinked in agreement. When she went out into the hallway, she saw Jacob and Kelly sitting outside her room. "Grandma, what are you doing there?" Jacob asked her. He was getting worried again. "A very good friend of mine is lying here. I lived with her until I didn't know who I was, where I was, and where I should go," she confessed to him. "All right, let's go and talk, and then we'll go to your acquaintance and thank her for doing everything for you," said her grandson to her. They went into the woman's room, laid out everything they had brought, and Jacob told her the most welcome news of all, perhaps the one Nancy had been waiting for all these years. "I called my parents yesterday, and they said they're coming to visit us in 2 weeks. He muttered to her. Jacob didn't have the breath to utter it. That's why he was interrupting. God, what happiness! Nancy clapped her hands, though she couldn't even remember her son's face, but it didn't matter now. The main thing was that they came, and everything else could be left for later. "Well, let's go meet your acquaintance," Jacob said to her, and they went to the room where Lisa was lying. When they got there, Kelly just froze at the door. "Why come in?" Jacob told her. It was the first time he had seen his girlfriend afraid or shy. "I can't," she answered, and turned away. She seemed to want to get out. "Why?" He didn't understand. "Because it's my mom," Kelly told him. She was surprised herself. It was impossible to even find the words. "Like what?" Mason jumped up from his seat. "Kelly, you're the one." He couldn't believe his eyes. Mason looked at her brother and could not believe that he was already so big. Lisa opened her eyes, and in that instant she cried. It had been so many years since she had seen her daughter to meet her now. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Kelly came up to her. She didn't know what to do, and she was afraid that she'd just gotten out of surgery. "What if it hurts?" "Daughter, please forgive me for everything," she exhaled. They hugged. "I have nothing to forgive you for." They both cried, because it's not every day that situations like this happen. "Wow." Jacob looked at that hug. "What are you so surprised about?" Nancy turned to him. "How could it be that your mother was the one who got my grandmother after you took her to the store?" said the young man. They were all sitting in Lisa's room. Mason climbed onto his sister's lap. That's when James walked in. "Oh, I see you two have already bonded," he said to them. "That's the word." And they told him who was who. "Wow, that's fate," he said. "But you don't know the most important thing. Your grandmother probably didn't tell you that. Not only did she live with Lisa, but she saved her life," the man said. "What do you mean?" Nancy doesn't remember anything. Kelly didn't realize at that moment. "That's it. If it hadn't been for your grandmother, you would never have met your mom again," the doctor said. A month later, Charles and Miranda arrived as promised. When they entered Nancy's house, they immediately started hugging her. "Who are you?" She looked at her son with surprise. "Mom, why don't you recognize me?" Charles kissed her on both cheeks. Tears ran down her cheeks. "Son," she said, as if trying to guess who had come to see her. "Yes, I'm sorry for all the times I didn't come. For leaving you with this dummy." She looked at Jacob. "Nancy, am I glad to see you?" Miranda hugged her. The woman looked at her as if she were a specimen in a museum. Charles and Jacob went to see James the next day. They wanted to know what to do about the mother. "You know, guys, this process, if it starts, you can only maintain the condition. You have to live with it. If it is a mild stage, which I think she is now, then she will remember in places, talk and do. But if it goes to severe, then brace yourself, and your mom and grandmother's heart is strong. So don't get your hopes up." He fell silent because there was a knock on the door. It was Kelly. She was very surprised to see her young man here. "What are you doing here?" He came up to her and said in a whisper, "Wait, I need to talk to James." She looked at the man. "Yeah, come on in. I'm listening. I hope you don't have any secrets from each other," said the man. "I'm not the only one." Kelly wheeled her mother into the study. Mason walked in as well. "I think you're on the same subject as we are." Lisa looked at Jacob. "We're about Grandma," he told her, "and I'm about her. You see, what happened to her is terrible, of course. But imagine the body's abilities, what it can do when it's in shock," Lisa said. It was quiet now, almost a whisper, but everyone could hear her well. "And what was James looking at her for?" "I would like Nancy to continue living with us. She's used to us in the house, knows everything. Mason thinks of her as a grandmother." She turned to Charles. "But that's up to you," the doctor shrugged. "All right. Now that all the medications have been administered, we should all get together," Charles said. They went back to the house. Lisa and Mason were with him. They ran through to Nancy what they had just said in the doctor's office. She smiled and hugged Mason. "Well, Mom, what will your choice be?" Charles looked at her. "Of course I will move, since they have become like family to me. And Jacob will salt and let them stay here." The woman cried. The son put everyone in the car. He drove his mother to the place where she was to live. After that, he got out of the car and helped the mother to get out. They went up to the floor, entered the apartment. "This place could use some repairs," the man said. "Will you do it?" The mother asked him. "And if I hire workers and buy the materials, you are very offended at me." He looked into the eyes of the one who had once put her whole life into raising him. His mother looked at him once. He took her by the shoulders. "I'm kidding. How could I forget you? You're the dearest and dearest thing in my life. I just have to show up more often, or she'll forget." Nancy smiled. "I've already thought of that." Charles stopped talking. "Well, it's okay," they hugged. And then, while the parents were here, Kelly invited Jacob over to her mother's house, where his grandmother was as well. Charles and Miranda drove up as well. There the young man was getting ready to propose. "Just please be happy," the grandmother said. "How are we?" Miranda smiled and kissed her husband. "No, you shouldn't leave your children behind either," he threatened. Charles fingered the future boyfriend of the newlyweds. "It's gonna be okay." Kelly was hugging her mother at that moment. She didn't understand how she could have left her then. And most importantly, she hadn't thought about it for so many years. She felt the same way she did now. When did Grandma get lost? The young went to the registry office. There they wrote everything they wanted. They were to be married in a month. How good it is to be young and happy. Nancy said, "Grandma, don't be sad." Jacob came up to her. The groom's father had bought him and the bride fancy wedding suits. No one was mad at anyone. Basically, everyone was to blame for what happened. Now everyone has forgiven each other. No one held a grudge. Do you agree? Did the woman at the front desk speak? Yes, Kelly did. Yes. Jacob looked at her. They congratulated each other with a kiss, and then twirled in the first wedding dance. "Your grandmother will soon be a great-grandmother." You whispered in Kelly Jacob's ear. "Were you seriously looking at your favorite? You think it's something to joke about?" She leaned away from him and looked into his eyes. "How long have you two been dancing?" Charles approached them. "It's okay," Jacob answered him. They went to the restaurant. While they were talking, the groom came up to the grandmother and kissed her. "Who are you?" Nancy looked at him. "Hi." He realized she was joking with him. The woman had gotten used to it lately. She squeezed his hand and kissed it. "I wish you well." Tears rolled from her eyes. "I have an announcement to make." Getting up from his seat at last, "We are listening to you," his father told him. "There's a new addition to our family, and my grandmother will change her status, as will you and my parents." He looked over to where Nancy was sitting. "Thank you." She sent him a kiss.